House of the Dragon, Episode 6, jumps us 10 years forward into the future, and the genealogical tumbleweed that is the Targaryen family tree looks like this. Rhaenyra and Laenor have 3 children, Jacaerys, Lucerys, and Joffrey, and they definitely belong to them with no infidelity at all, okay? The Targaryen and Velaryon genes are strong, you might say. Now in the books, it's a big deal that a lot of people think that Rhaenyra's kids have been fathered by Harwin Strong, this guy. You'll remember how important Joffrey's blonde hair was in discovering that he's not really Robert's son and the war that followed, and likewise, these kids have dark brown hair rather than the signature white blonde Targaryen hair. Now technically, this isn't unprecedented. We have a bunch of Targaryens across history who haven't had Valyrian features, but it does raise an eyebrow, doesn't it? And yeah, the show does seem to confirm that these are indeed Harwin's kids. So Harwin should be jammed somewhere in here. We also have Daemon and Lyanna, they got married and they've got 2 kids. Also, it was really cool seeing Lyanna ride Vhagar and how they captured how this dragon is so old and withered. You know, this is one of the ones that helped conquer Westeros, and there was a real gravity to how Vhagar flew. The books say it's not really clear whether Daemon loved Lyanna or he was just using her to gain more power and stature, and in the show it's not clear how much he loves her, but there does seem to be some sort of care and warmth between them. Daemon does seem to have matured in some way across these 10 years, even though he still feels lost and kind of a purposelessness. He says, in one scene that old Valyria is gone, we don't belong anywhere. So he's still searching for that glory, but he does seem to have left behind some of that antagonism. One really interesting detail in this episode is we get a direct parallel between Lyanna giving birth here and Emma's birth in the first episode, because, when Daemon is offered whether to force a cesarean on her, that would kill her, Daemon says no, which could be because he doesn't care that much about having a son, even though the book says that he does really care about having a son. But again, this is conjecture, it's Maesters kind of figuring things out about history. But I personally like to think it's from some kind of care he has for her, a respect for how she might want to die. Laena says earlier in the episode, I want to have a dragon rider's death, and she goes out and Vhagar just absolutely evaporates her with fire. In the books, that detail is missing. She never quite makes it to Vhagar, and she collapses and dies on the steps after giving birth. Lastly, we have our decrepit Draugr of a man that is Viserys. He's got 3 kids with Alicent now, Aegon, Helena, and Aemond. One really interesting detail, again, is that the opening, the one that's all about the bloodlines of the Targaryen family, that's changed to reflect these new generations, these new kids. And it will continue to change as these different generations come to be. But I don't think most people will notice that. Like, one of the reasons I don't feel this is as strong an opening as the one in Game of Thrones is it's not a particularly helpful visual reference for what's going on in the series, where the original showed you the different locations and where they are in relation to each other. Whereas with this, you've kind of got to know what all the icons are before you can really start to piece it together and who they represent. And that's going back generations of characters that are never mentioned in the series. But one other detail, keep an eye on what Helena says in future episodes, because there's a decent hint in this one that she has the gift of prophecy and foresight. There is so much foreshadowing in this show, like the line at the end with Larys, children are a weakness. Yeah, we'll see where that goes. And this brings us to the main theme of this episode, and in fact, the main theme of the Dance of Dragons, intergenerational conflict. So the Dance of Dragons, this Targaryen civil war we're all leading up to, it isn't like the War of 5 Kings that we saw in Game of Thrones. It is incredibly personal and intimate and ugly. This is a conflict that has been passed down the generations, from father to son, mother to daughter, vengeance for vengeance. People have been trained into this conflict from a young age. We see this quite nicely in the training scene with Criston Cole, where he pits Rhaenyra's kids against Alicent's. Harwin, of course, eggs on Rhaenyra's, while Cole bets on Alicent's. And all of this plays out, like a proxy war between the adults, where instead of taking it out on each other, they get their children to act it out. And there's the scene where Alicent goes to her son, is it safe? Is it secret? Gandalf style. And she says, your life is gonna be forfeit. You will be king. You will take the throne, even though you're not the heir to come. And I mean, these children don't naturally want this fight. Leave Aegon alone. The poor kid just wants to feed the birds. You'll notice that the kids are wearing the colors of their parents. You know, we have this conflict between the blacks and the greens, and we have Alicent's kids in greens, Rhaenyra's in black and red, even though they are technically the same house. You know, they're both House Targaryen. And all the while, Viserys isn't stopping this. You know, he is allowing this conflict to fester like his wounds. There's even this line when they're talking about the stepstones, where they say, "We have been lax, and now the old monster rears its head." And this is kind of indicative of Viserys' reign, you know? Like, it's not just the stepstones. Viserys has not been proactive enough in preventing these conflicts to come. All of this does bring me to a challenge that I think House of the Dragon faces, you know, with the style of storytelling that they're going for, with all of these time skips. It's going to mean that they have to repeatedly introduce plot beats and characters and conflicts and then very quickly resolve them or like move on from them, or not necessarily get to development of them, you know, a huge amount. When you're going through this many events, you don't necessarily have a lot of space to make them land. We saw this with the Crab Feeder in the Stepstones, with Lyanna's death in this episode. A character was being played by 3 different people across a long period of time, with Harwin Strong basically introduced this episode. You know, it's the only time he really gets much screen time, and then he's gone. And then also Joffrey, you know, Lyanna's lover, last episode, introduced and then gone. I know why they're doing this, and I actually reckon they're handling it about as well as they possibly could. But I can totally understand how this might throw some people off. A feeling of not knowing what's going to stick around, whether they should care, some plot beats feeling more like bullet points than arcs. I only bring this up because I think this was the first episode where I really felt that, because, you know, Lyanna's death, it's quite a, you know, emotional moment in theory, but I didn't really feel like I could super get into it because I just don't know her character. Although with the very little screen time she's had, mostly in this episode, I really did like her. If you are a more casual viewer, if you haven't read the books, is this something that is coming to mind for you? I'd be really interested to know. They're still very much maneuvering our characters into position. That's really hard when you've got generations to get through, and I think we actually have another time jump to come after this. Especially, you know, balancing this timeline and this pacing, it's hard. We are fundamentally still in setup, even though I think they've disguised that really well. So yeah, does it bother you, or do you notice that they are kind of introducing things quickly and then resolving them, or do you feel that that core conflict between Rhaenyra and Alicent and, you know, these 2 branches of the royal family, is that a strong enough through line for you that you're not really noticing it, doesn't really bother you? I was worried about the new actresses and actors. I didn't think they might sell it, but boy, no, they're fantastic. I think Laenor was really standout for me this episode. I loved seeing the subtle changes in the relationships that grew out of the characters we knew before. Like, Alicent is clearly more comfortable speaking around for and to Viserys now. Alicent and Rhaenyra do feel like our old characters, just with way more bitterness added in. And speaking of bitterness, this does bring me to another thing that has been on my mind. Likeable characters. Do you feel like we have any really likable characters in the show, and does that impact your enjoyment? The first half did a really good job of humanizing and making us like Alicent and Rhaenyra and Criston Cole, but since the time jump, you know, they are so much less likable. Alicent making a woman who just gave birth climb up the stairs to come see her. Criston is, of course, this spurned man who makes children beat each other. Rhaenyra has her moments, you know, she apologizes and says, let's marry our houses, but she also, like, commands Laenor to stay behind. We are told in the books that the amity between her grace and the stepdaughter proved short-lived, for both Rhaenyra and Alicent aspired to be the first lady of the realm. So we saw that amity and niceness, you know, in the first half, and I guess we're getting the bitterness from now on. And we can look at the likable characters we did have. You know, we had Harwin and Lionel Strong, but they both died this episode. Joffrey, Lyanna's lover, was likable too, but he was killed at the wedding. Lyanna, in her few scenes, was likable, but again, dead. Emma, dead. Even Viserys, probably dead soon. You know, they're killing everyone who is overtly likable, it feels. And as we're getting introduced to the kids, it's like half of them are little dicks as well. Not that they're nice in the books. We also finally have this character who really came into a role this episode, Larys Strong. And he's an interesting case study, okay? I want to read you a quote about him. The enigma that is Lara Strong, the clubfoot, has vexed students of history for generations, and it is not one we can unravel here. Where did his true loyalty lie? What was he about? He wove his way through the Dance of Dragons, vanishing and reappearing. Was he just a man who sailed with the prevailing wind, or did he know where he was bound when he set out? We do know that he was sly, secretive, yet plausible and pleasant when need be. They took this character, who is very mysterious and unknowable in the books, and they turned him into a kin-slaying, murdering manipulator, which I don't hate in theory, but it could have been an opportunity to add in someone who was a lot more likable. A character with a bit more humanity, like Varys, who was also a spy master. Also, a tip. If you want to run a spy ring, don't have all of your spies wear your symbol. I think that gives it away. Now we do have Corlys, Rhaenys, and Daemon, who are either likable, becoming more likable, or are so badass and cool that you can't help but like them. But the cast is dominated by characters who aren't as easy to like. Rhaenyra does absolutely have her moments, but she's also very frustrating, you know? That does not mean you can't root for them. People love characters who are not necessarily good, but you still want to root for, right? But I think I'd like to see just a few more positive relationships in the series. I get something out of seeing that kind of, character and relationship. And even though the Dance of Dragons is a bitter fight between bitter people, that doesn't mean that there's no room for humanity. This isn't about the quality of the writing, this is just about my personal enjoyment. But I think it might impact how other people enjoy the series as well, and I'm curious how you feel about that. I would have loved to have seen more of Harwin Strong, but alas. Also, Lara Strong doesn't necessarily kill his family in the books. Like, that's why he's not exactly like he is in the show. I am 90% sure also of what the episode 9, the big moment of this season, is going to be, but we're going to have to see. I won't spoil it for you. What do you think? Anyway, stay nerdy, and I'll see you in the future.